Viewers, a month after the tragic Air India plane crash in Ahmedabad that claimed the lives of 260 people, the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau has released the preliminary probe report. Now, as per the AAIB report, fuel cut-off switches of both the engines transitioned from run to cut-off position, one after another, with a time gap of just 1 second. Now, this led to the snapping of fuel supply to both the engines, causing them to lose power. But the report doesn't mention what caused the fuel switches to move. Was it due to a human action, or was it mechanical failure, or was it an electronic issue? That critical question remains unanswered and is the focus of the ongoing investigation. The preliminary report also contains a paraphrased account of the communication that took place inside the cockpit pertaining to the fuel cutoff. One of the pilots is heard asking the other, why did he cut off the fuel switch? The other pilot then responds that he did not do so. After the fuel supply cut off, the pilots scrambled to save the aircraft. Within about 10 to 14 seconds of the fuel cutoff, they moved both fuel switches back to the run position. Both the engines began automatic restart sequences, with engine 1 actually showing signs of recovery and engine 2 attempting to relight. But the recovery could not be achieved due to the insufficient time and the altitude of the aircraft. Times Now gets you a real-time analysis from a simulator cockpit explaining what could have happened. This is a look at what could have happened in those crucial seconds that led to the crash.
That's the million-dollar question, that what happened in this particular time period, because for 31 seconds the flight was in the air, starting from the time it took a lift from the ground. At 3 seconds, what we got to know, we are in this flight simulator. This is Airbus 320. I'm joined by Captain Alok Singh, who will be describing it for the viewers that what exactly happened in this time period.
Actually, if you look here, this is engine number 1. This is engine number 1. Engine number 2. In Airbus, we call it master switches. In Boeing, we call it fuel shut-off valve. So basically, all they are doing is supplying fuel.
So I took a lift.
Yes. So in this particular case, the pilots, they advanced the throttle for takeoff. And aircraft accelerated to a speed of 180 knots. Now this airspeed has increased. And
so
now
we are taking off. It's 3. Now I am telling you why have you switched off.
At this time, if you see, both the engines has been switched off. Engine electronic control. It will try to automatically give continuous ignition to the engine to enable the pilots to start the engines. They started to try they tried to start the
exactly
engines.
in 30 seconds.
Absolutely. One of the engine did not responded. One engine responded for the startup. It started to spool up. But it was too late, because by the time the aircraft already crashed.
So viewers, let's now get you the details of the preliminary probe report and what are the findings. Now, as per the details, the fuel switches had flipped to cut off, and this happened mid-air. So the aircraft had taken off, but the fuel went to the cut-off position. It happened mid-air. Now, here is where the questions come in. What happened? What led to the switch going to the cut-off position? Was it done manually, or was it because of a technical failure that it led to? Then let's look at the next finding. It goes on to say that the fuel switches changed to run within seconds. So it was in the cut-off position. It was changed to run immediately, but it was not enough. There was no adequate time for the plane to actually take off. In fact, engines lost power right after takeoff. Now, this is a very crucial finding, because there were several questions that were raised on what really happened. Was it the engines or not? In fact, the the findings go on to say that the pilots had tried to restart, and there was one engine that did actually partially recover, but there was not enough time for the flight to recover. In fact, the cockpit audio, which becomes very, very crucial. What did the pilots speak in the seconds that led to the crash? Their conversation was very important, and the cockpit audio actually shows one pilot asking the other, why did you cut it off? He was talking about the fuel switch, and the other pilot is heard responding, saying, I did not do so. So this was a conversation that took place between the two pilots on the questions on whether they were well rested or not. The findings have found that they were well rested. They had passed the alcohol test as well. So there was no question of the pilots not being prepared enough. Apart from that, the plane had enough fuel. It was also well within the weight limits. Remember, this was also one of the questions that had been raised on whether the weight was too much or whether there was no adequate fuel or whether the fuel had been contaminated. Now, the findings have shown very clearly that the fuel quality was tested and it was found completely okay. There was nothing wrong with the fuel. There was no contamination that had taken place. The flap handle position was also consistent with the normal takeoff. Now, with questions raising on was there an issue during the takeoff? As of now, the preliminary report suggesting that there was nothing wrong. In fact, the thrust levers also remained forward until the impact, until you could see the plane actually plunging downward. And there is no significant bird activity that has been observed in the vicinity. With multiple questions being raised, remember initially with only the video available, there were a lot of theories doing the rounds, whether it was the weight, whether it was a fuel contamination, whether it was a bird hit. In fact, all of these theories have been thrown out of the window. It has been ruled out completely. The AIB preliminary report has also not recommended any action against these entities. Now, we told you what the findings are. Is there going to be any action that is initiated? Does the AIB speak about or recommend any action that should be taken against the entities? The answer is no. Boeing, which is the aircraft manufacturer, there is no action that is recommended against Boeing. Remember, this comes amid a lot of questions that have been raised. A lot of people talking about how Boeing aircraft is unsafe. It had been ruled out. Many had been waiting for this report, and the report actually does not recommend any action against Boeing. On the questions of the engine as well, no action has been recommended against General Electric, which is the engine manufacturer as well. And apart from that, Air India, the operator of the ill-fated aircraft, also not being recommended any action at all. So these are the details in the preliminary report that has been submitted. It's a 15-page report, and my colleague Arunil Saradekar is joining us on the broadcast with the details. Arunil, there are several questions that still remain. Yes, many have been answered. Initially, there were a lot of theories doing the rounds. Many of them have been ruled out in these findings. Break this down for us, the 15-page report that has been filed by the AAIB.
Well, no proper directive has been issued by the AAIB to Boeing or to Air India or to General Electric. But it has also mentioned, the last part of the 15-page report mentions that more evidences have been sought from all the stakeholders related to this plane, ill-fated plane, so that the investigation clearly proceeds. It is not a complete clean sheet that has been given by the AIB to Boeing, to Air India or to General Electric as well. Now, coming to the significant points or the key points from this 15-page report. It is clearly mentioned that the co-pilot was the pilot flying. The controls were in his hands, and the pilot in command, who's basically the senior pilot in this case, he was the pilot monitoring. He was responsible for coordinating ATC, and other systems were in his control. Now, there were many theories that were floating earlier. It can be fuel contamination, bird hit, it can be fuel engine failure. But now it seems like the 15-page preliminary report of the AIB, it is fairly conclusive. What it is saying is that the fuel stopped reaching from the fuel tank to both the engines. Basically, the fuel switch, it turned from run to switch off, and that is why the fuel stopped reaching. In fact, it also mentions about a very incriminating conversation that took place between both the pilots, wherein it has been recorded on the cockpit voice recorder. What it says is that one of the pilots is asking the other pilot that, did you turn it off? The other pilot is saying that I didn't. Now, which is the pilot who's telling the other pilot, whether it is the co-pilot or the pilot in command, that is yet not been clear, but that can be ascertained by speaking to the family members of a pilot who can basically recognize their voice as well. One more important point is that the N2 value of both the engines, it fell below the ideal speed mark. That is why the crash basically took place. That is why then there were an attempt to ensure that the engines again gained power. It didn't happen. One of the engines tried to revive, but it didn't happen. The other engine had failed, and the revival couldn't take place. One more important aspect, give me 1 minute only, Pratibha. Basically, there were two black boxes on this Boeing flight. Basically, the first black box, the cockpit voice recorder as well as the flight data recorder. The details from there have been recovered by the AIB. However, the flight data recorder in the rear end, it has been completely damaged. That has been mentioned in the 15-page report, and efforts have been made to retrieve data from that as well. So whether any further, obviously the investigation proceeds from now.
Detailed report will give us more answers. As of now, of course, we've got many answers to many of the theories are being shut down completely, but there are still some of the questions that remain, isn't it? Arunil, thank you for joining us with those details. Joining us live on the broadcast is also James Healy-Pratt, an aviation expert. Many thanks for joining us on Times Now, Mr. Pratt. I want to begin by asking about the preliminary report that has been filed by the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau. The 15-page report on the Air India crash that occurred on the June 12th. While it is still an early assessment, the report doesn't actually offer much insight into the root cause of the accident. What is your interpretation? What is your assessment of the findings so far?
Well, the good thing is that the preliminary report has removed about 90% of the various theories and speculation that has surrounded this tragedy over the past month. So we know the focus is now on the history of the fuel control levers and also what happened in that cockpit during the last 20 seconds of the flight. So the families that we're helping and advising and looking after have a little more clarity, but they still want further answers to some serious questions that we say Air India and Boeing need to provide.
Okay, in fact, as per the preliminary report, both the engine's fuel cutoff switches were moved from run to cutoff. What could have caused both the fuel cutoff switches to move from run to cutoff simultaneously during the takeoff? What do you think could have happened? Could it be manual? Could it be because of a technical error?
Well, we know there was a history of problems with the fuel cutoff switches. In 2018, the American safety regulator, the FAA, issued an airworthiness bulletin. Remarkably, they considered that there were issues with the latch mechanism, the locking mechanism of these levers, but they didn't consider that that was unsafe. But they were aware that certain Boeing operators had switches which had been incorrectly installed, and that meant that the fuel switches could be inadvertently knocked, which of course in a lot of people's view is unsafe. Anyhow, Air India did not decide to follow that bulletin, and we know there's a history with those switches. The other thing, of course, is that there could be an electrics issue. We just don't know. More work needs to be done on precisely how those switches in that aircraft were functioning and how they could have been turned off, because, as we all know, there's no good reason why those fuel cutoff switches should have been taken from run to cutoff.
Okay. Okay, all right. Mr. Pratt, thank you for joining us on the broadcast. Appreciate you joining us with your expertise. The Civil Aviation Minister, though, has warned against drawing any conclusions, urging people to wait for the final report to come out.
I don't think we should jump into any conclusions on this. I truly believe we have the most wonderful workforce in terms of pilots and the crew in the whole world. I have to appreciate all the efforts the pilots and the crew in this country are putting into the aviation. They are the backbone of this civil aviation. They are the primary resource of civil aviation, and we care for the welfare and the well-being of our pilots also. So let's not jump to any conclusions at this stage. Let us wait for the final report.
In fact, despite the government's appeal against jumping the gun, the opposition parties have rushed to conclusion. Congress party claims that the BJP government is trying to save certain people and pin the blame on the pilots. The TMC asserted that to say that the pilots switched off both fuel cutoff switches is making an absolute mockery of India. Mamata Banerjee's party, in fact, also alleged that Boeing's PR cabal can get away by saying anything. Similar sentiments were also echoed by the RJD, which claimed that the government is being controlled by big companies and huge money.
और अब जो प्रारंभिक रिपोर्ट आई उसमें कहा जा रहा है कि दोनों इंजन की फ्यूल सप्लाई बंद हुई। ये कैसे हुआ? जब एक आदमी टिकट लेके बैठता है तो उसकी सुरक्षा की गारंटी वो सरकार करती है, जो मेंटेनेंस करती है। आखिर 270 से ज्यादा जाने जिस हादसे में गई हूं उसका गुनहगार कौन है, दोषी कौन है? देश जवाब चाहता है।
My colleague Tejshri is joining us on the broadcast with the details. Tejshri, take us through the theories that are being floated by the opposition and why the Civil Aviation Ministry has said that we should wait for the final report to be out.
Well, the opposition is questioning on several fronts as far as the preliminary report is concerned. However, the government, particularly the Civil Aviation Minister Ram Mohan Naidu and MOS, Civil Aviation has already made their stance clear that this is just a preliminary report and several assumptions should not be made by any kind of political leader, especially in the opposition itself, because we have been seeing that opposition parties like Congress and TMC have been questioning the report, and in fact when it comes to questioning the report they are going beyond it and also questioning the role of government and the kind of stance the government has been taking. But yes, we'll have to see that what happens next when this entire investigation report is once out. Will it be answering all the questions that are still left unanswered in this preliminary report? Back to you.
Okay, all right, Tejshri, thank you for joining us with those details. Unfortunately, the politics around it continuing, while what the families and the entire country is waiting for is answers to what really happened that led